Jivana, Saraswati, Claudia. Wow. I mean, everyone, it's incredible. Thanks for coming. I feel like I'm almost embarrassed because you all know me like already. So like, what is there to do here? I should say, I mean, I started, gosh, I took teacher training at the Institute in 1995. And my first teacher was actually a woman named Kazuko Onodera, who was living in Berkeley at the time. She used to be on the board of directors of the Institute. And I started studying with her in 1991. And, you know, integral yoga was my whole world. I managed the Institute and then was for a very short time was director. But I managed for, I don't know, God knows, 20 years or something. And I ran the teacher training programs. And like Ramananda said, accessible yoga really grew out of the San Francisco IYI. The Institute was actually our fiscal sponsor when we started. And Ramananda has been probably like one of my main supporters all that time. So I think a lot of the credit goes to him and to, you know, the Institute board for supporting me and helping me create something, you know, based on the integral yoga teaching. So I'm very grateful to that, to the Institute and Ramananda in particular. And I do talk to him all the time still. So just so you know, even though I miss all of you, I have stayed connected with him, which is nice. And I'm lucky to do that. And you're all lucky to get to spend time with him and study with him, as you probably know. And I would say within the whole organization of integral yoga, there are very few people that live the teachings the way that he does. And he continues to inspire me all the time. So I'm just so grateful to you, Ramananda, for actually representing yoga and the way you live and teach. It's incredible. So thank you. I actually have a lot to cover and I wasn't really sure where to start, but I figured, to be honest, I'm actually just starting to work on a new book. And this workshop is part of that, actually, part of what I'm thinking about sharing in a new book, which is just really like, what do we need to know as yoga teachers to keep our students safe, to make them feel welcome, to make our classes accessible? I think the yoga world's changed a lot. And, you know, a lot of us didn't necessarily get the training in those areas. Like, how do we do that? What do we do to become kind of up to date? So that's what I'm hoping to share with you tonight. All right, and please let me know if you have any questions or thoughts. My dog's barking, I don't know if you can hear her. Normally I like to make workshops interactive, but this is a lot of lecture. And what I thought we could do is I have a PowerPoint, but within each topic, I have a reflection question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the topic and then pause and ask you to journal. So hopefully you have something to write with or write on. But I'm going to ask you to kind of answer the questions that I have before I present my thoughts on that topic, if that makes sense. And then you can share in the chat if you like. If we had more time, it would have been really nice for you to be able to talk with each other. But I'm also happy to have you come on the mic and share your thoughts if that's helpful. All right, I'm going to get started. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I didn't really introduce myself. One thing I wanted to say is I'd like to introduce myself with my pronouns, and I would encourage you to do the same. Some of you have them in your Zoom, you know, name already, but I think it's a really important aspect of accessibility. So my name is Jivana Heyman. My pronouns are he and him. And I live on Chumash land, which is known as Santa Barbara, California. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight, about why I would say those things. But I would encourage you to put your pronouns in your Zoom name. And if you don't know how, you can go into the participant list, find yourself, and then click more and edit your name there.
Jivana, would you say a few words about why that's important?
Sure. I'm trying to remember if it's in the workshop I'm about to give or not, but I can just say now that the reason that we share our pronouns is that it helps for people who have pronouns that may not match their physical appearance, or people who choose pronouns that are less common, like they, them pronouns, for example, people who are non-binary or trans who want to feel that they can use their pronouns and it might feel like a sensitive thing for them to do. And so if, as a cisgendered person, so cisgender is someone whose gender matches the gender they were assigned at birth. And so I'm a cisgender man. I don't really have to deal with gender issues so much in my life. I have a lot of privilege in that area. And so it's up to me to help create spaces that are more welcoming to those who don't have that privilege. And by sharing my pronouns and offering that as a gesture right up front, it can help people, like I said, who might not use pronouns that match their appearance or use different pronouns than that. Does that make sense?
Yes. If everybody does it, then they don't stand out like a sore thumb trying to be different.
Yeah, and also what's great about Zoom is it's right there. And so then you can also be careful that you're not misgendering somebody.
Yeah.
Because the piece that I want to get to in the talk tonight, and I guess I can say it right now, is that in the end, to me, yoga is about connecting with our personal power, our inner source of strength and power. And things like the name I call myself, the pronouns that I use, the way I refer to myself, say if I have a disability or not, all of those choices are very personal and profound. And people need to have the power and the authority or the agency to make those choices for themselves. And the more we give options for people to do that, the more they're empowered in that space. And so if you were to misgender somebody, like if I just say, oh, you look female, so I'm going to call you her, she or her, that's offensive also to someone who may not identify in that way. Meaning it's not up to me to decide what someone's pronouns are. It's up to them. I can talk about that longer, but let's see, it'll come up again here, I think. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And the other thing I want to say about accessibility is that if you're teaching online, and like this, I'm giving a PowerPoint, it's important that I describe what's on the screen. So I also actually would begin by describing myself personally. So I'm a white gay man, and I'm currently wearing a white shirt, and I have a beard, and I'm wearing glasses. There's a bookcase behind me and a curtain and a white door. And by describing that, that becomes more accessible to people who might be blind or low vision. Now on the screen, there's also a slide that says making yoga classes welcoming, accessible, and safer with Jivana. And there's an image on the right of people practicing together, and they're doing variations of tree pose. And this image shows how people can be practicing all different variations of a pose together. So there's people doing standing variations of trees, seated variations, people all different body types and races practicing together. And this slide has an image of the Institute that I found. That's Susan Ford back there teaching chair yoga class. There was a carpet back then, which I think is gone now, right? And this slide says what we'll cover. My background, so I'm going to talk a bit more about myself. I want to talk about disability justice, philosophical context for social justice in yoga, yoga and ableism, power dynamics, agency and consent, language and culture in classes, and spiritual bypassing. I know that's a lot, so I hope it's not overwhelming, and I hope it's interesting to you. Let me know, please, as we go along. All right. So I wanted to introduce myself. I explained that I was trained at the Institute, and I taught there for many years. Around that time, and actually just before then, so I moved to San Francisco from New York in 1990, and I was involved with ACT UP New York, which is an AIDS activist group. I should say I came out of the closet in, I don't know, I think it was 1984 when I was 17, so you can do the math. I'm 54 now. Anyway, I came out right in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, which, I think those of you living in San Francisco might have a sense of it. I mean, it's, many of you are very knowledgeable about it, but, it's worth studying and learning about if you don't know. As I was coming out, pretty much everyone I met, people I was dating and my friends were positive, had AIDS or died. And over the course of that time, I lost a lot of close people, including my best friend, Kurt. And that picture, there's a picture in the upper left of me when I was very young with my friend Kurt, who died. And actually, it's funny, not funny really, but interesting that he really encouraged me to become a yoga teacher. And I was very involved with activism, and yoga was really helping me personally. And he really encouraged me to share yoga with my community. And so I signed up for the Institute's training. Actually, Ramananda, I think you led our retreat, maybe? Yeah. It was with Durga and Divyananda. Anyway, and then I graduated, I think it was like May of 1995, and Kurt died like 2 months later. And so I came into the training knowing that I wanted to start teaching yoga classes for people with HIV and AIDS. And so I did. And so we started a class at the Institute. And then I started one at, I don't know what it's called anymore, that California Pacific Medical Center that was, in the Castro. And that class went on for many years, like 12 or more years. And some of you may have been there. On this slide, there's also, it says queer AIDS activism. There's silence equals death with the pink triangle, which was the symbol that was used during the Holocaust. The Nazis used that symbol for gay men. And silence equals death is this idea that we need to speak up when you see something being done that's wrong, or you see people being harmed in some way, right? Speaking up against injustice is, I think, the message of that symbol and that poster. On the lower right is a photo that, I don't know if I took it or my husband, Matt, might have taken it at an ACT UP protest in Washington, DC. Around that time, I got arrested there. I got arrested many times. Did some really wacky stuff with ACT UP that I can't believe I did. And the picture on the lower left is the only picture I can find of me actually demonstrating. I'm in that picture. You have to find me. It's kind of like, where's Waldo? That was Queer Nation marching at the New York Pride Parade in 1989, maybe, or 90, right before I moved to San Francisco. Do you see me? Do I have to point myself out? I was already getting bald. I'll just put it that way. I was very skinny and I was wearing white. So maybe I was already teaching because I was wearing white right in the middle there. I don't know if you can see me. I had like a brown belt on. Anyway, you get the idea. I want to talk more broadly about disability justice and disability rights. So on the upper left is a picture of Ed Roberts, who was very famous for really, I would say, in many ways, starting the contemporary disability movement during the 60s. He was a student at Berkeley. Actually, he was first got into Berkeley and then rejected when they found out that he was disabled and needed a big apparatus to breathe. And then he fought them in court and won the right to go to Berkeley. He eventually became a lawyer and really helped to move disability justice forward, including starting many of the what is that organization? Those they're all over. Anyway, he's a very powerful person. There's a quote from him. It says, "There are only two kinds of people in the world, the disabled and the yet to be disabled." And I thought that's a really interesting idea, huh? And then the lower right is an image of Haben Girma. It's actually the cover of her book, The Deafblind Woman Who Conquered Harvard Law. And she also worked for Obama in the White House. And there's a quote from her which says, "Inspiration, that word is often used as a disguise for pity. If you feel inspired, make a commitment today to do one thing to make your community more accessible." And then I have the names of a few other activists, Tiffany Yu, Alice Wong, Judith Heumann, who was the focus of an amazing documentary called Crip Camp. Swami Sudananda, who's a Swami at the ashram, is actually in that documentary. I really recommend you watch it. Some other organizations I list here, including some yoga specific ones, Mind Body Solutions, which was created by Matthew Sanford. Again, incredible teacher. If you don't know him, I really recommend you look him up. He wrote an amazing book called Waking. Arthritis.yoga, which is started by Stephanie Munez, Integral Yoga, yogaforseniors.com, Carol Khrushchev, that's an amazing group, and there's so many more. So I want to just kind of shift now back to yoga philosophy, and to yoga philosophy, and kind of take a broader perspective on this conversation around the role of power in yoga, and specifically in the yoga teachings. And when I say power, I think it's a little confusing because power is such a generic and big word, but I'm interested in the ways that we either disempower people or share power with them in the context of yoga teaching, yoga business, and also within the essential philosophy itself. And so that's what I thought we'd start with, is looking at what does yoga actually teach us about this idea of power and agency. And I have an image here on the right of a statue of Patanjali. He's half serpent, right? So this is where I want to start asking you a question. So my question for you is, what themes in the sutras relate to individual power? And I wonder if we could just take a moment and for you to journal about that and write some ideas down. Would that be okay? So I'm going to actually time 1 minute. Okay, so I'm curious if you have thoughts you're willing to share in the chat, or if someone wants to come on the mic, you could raise your hand. And I hope the question was clear enough. I know that as integral yoga teachers that you all are very familiar with the sutras. Yes, future suffering can be avoided. Thanks, Claudia.
Jivana, I'll get us started here. We had 4 of us in the room, and it was mentioned number 2, right? The stilling of the mind stuff is yoga. That's kind of a personal power, but then also 3 and 4 that follow it sound like it's involved with personal power. So 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, yeah. So basically the whole thing. I like that, because 2, 3, and 4 basically define the whole of the teachings. Yeah, Ramananda's Yama Niyama. Ashtavakra is Satguru. 4 locks and 4 keys, ways to keep our peace. Yeah, Sarni said the same. Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say that's what I was going to say is the whole thing. And I have some specific thoughts here. Let's see if I can get them. So what I'm thinking of is the ways that yoga and the sutras in particular teach us that what we seek is found within. And so to me, that's an incredibly powerful statement. The idea that, in capitalism, we're trained that we need to find external validation through owning things, through achieving certain, levels of achievement in the world, through amassing power and wealth. And I would say that the yoga teachings are the opposite of that. Yoga teachings are really at odds with capitalism, and that they say that actually true power and peace is found within us rather than the external world. That's a very powerful statement that Patanjali is making. And it's really not a surprise that we're not really taught that very much within contemporary yoga, because contemporary yoga is often taught within a capitalist context. But I have a few other thoughts, like making peace with the mind. So oftentimes when we're studying the sutras, we're being told to quiet the mind, and there's a sense of the mind being bad or wrong. And I like to take a slightly more tempered approach to finding a sustainable relationship with the mind, and to, I don't know how to say it, to create peace within us so that we actually can live with our own minds. And to me, that's very powerful. And like Claudia said right away, reducing suffering is another important teaching within the sutras, and also having clear vision, being able to discriminate between the real and the unreal, which is what he talks about in book 2, right? Viveka, discriminative discernment. And then Diana said, all of it, but individual achievement supports and is supported by the collective. Yes, that is true. That's this next point, actually. So this slide said service and social justice in the Bhagavad Gita. And I have another question for you. Can we take a minute on this one? This question says, how does the Gita speak to the ideals of social justice? And actually there's an image on the right. It's an old drawing, actually, or painting of Krishna standing and Arjuna at his feet with the battle going on in the background. So my question for you is, how does the Gita speak to the ideals of social justice? Is that clear, that question? I'm going to give you another minute to work on that one. Okay, so what are your thoughts about that? I guess we first have to question, like, what are the ideals of social justice? And then what does the Gita say about that? But do you have any ideas? Nothing? I know you do. Okay, Mukunda, what did you say? We may want to give up when the battle feels too complex, but by understanding we have a purpose here, we can move from there, right? Like Dharma, right? Is what you're saying. Yeah. Ramananda says, focus on karma yoga, serving all. Yeah. Anyone else? Share my thoughts.
Non-attachment.
Non-attachment. Yes. In fact, just as you said that, Sevaka wrote equanimity is available to all. Yeah, non-attachment. Yeah, well, let's see what I said. So I thought, well, what I did is I actually quoted the Gita for you. I think I agree with everything you're saying. I think that karma yoga in particular is this idea that we're not simply living for ourselves, that we're actually serving others. And so to me, the ideals of social justice are based in the idea of equity, the idea that we all should share the same basic human rights. And we don't. Not all humans share the same basic human rights. And I mean, I probably should have spent some time on that, and I didn't, but I'll just say quickly that generally speaking, some of us are closer to power. We have more resources, right? We might have all kinds of resources, not just money, but resources in terms of access to work and access to housing and food and clean water. Some of us don't have that, you know, and a lot of people I don't really like the word marginalized, but are just like under-resourced. They just don't have access to the same type of resources that other people have. And that's where I think yoga comes in, because yoga, at least within the Gita, talks about, as a yoga practitioner, my goal is to serve others and to find, to not focus on what I get, but on what I can give to others. And not only what I can give to others, but seeing myself in others. And I actually think that's really the key, is to see our own self in others, especially others who may be suffering or struggling in some way. And I don't mean in kind of a savior way. Like, I'm not saying we should be a savior, but I think when we see ourselves as equal to everyone, it changes our perception of the world. So I have two slokas from the Gita from chapter 6. Number 29 says, as your mind becomes harmonized through yoga practices, you begin to see the Atman in all beings, that should say beings, and all beings in yourself. You see the same self everywhere and in everything. So that what I think Krishna is saying there is, like, as you become basically enlightened, you see yourself and others. But then he goes on a few slokas later in 32, and he says, the yogi who perceives the essential oneness everywhere naturally feels the pleasure or pain of others as his or her own. And that line I find repeating over and over in my head, because it's interesting. To me, it's almost like he's saying beyond enlightenment. Like, he's in 29, he's describing, I think, enlightenment. But then he's saying beyond enlightenment, then we actually feel other people's pleasure and pain as our own. I think, to me, this is, and maybe I'm obsessing about this one part, and we could talk more generally, but I feel like in this part, there's this clear message that it's through connection. I think maybe Deanna said it earlier in the chat about community and serving others and seeing ourselves in others, that we tend in the West to think of enlightenment or the yogic path as a very personal journey. We tend to think of our own practice, what will we get, our own achievement, quieting our minds, turning inward, right? It's a very, I think contemporary yoga is a very, even like integral yoga still is a very inward focus in terms of find that in ourselves first. But of course, Gurdjieff was clear, then go out and serve others. And I think he was unusual in the world of yoga to make that next step regarding service. And I think that's clear in the Gita. And I think sorely lacking within a lot of the yoga world. There's really more of this just inward focus, and we stop there. There was a really interesting study done at the University of Buffalo in New York on mindfulness. The research was about whether mindfulness made people more self-centered or less self-centered. And what do you think? But before I say, what do you think? Does mindfulness make you more or less self-centered?
I see a thumbs up from Eric.
Oh, Eric, more self-centered? Is that what you said, Eric? Yeah, more. Yeah, actually, so it's a little complicated. The research showed that if you were self-centered before, mindfulness makes you more self-centered. If you're selfless, if you're not a self-centered person before, mindfulness makes you even more giving, more generous. And I thought that was very interesting, because to me, it goes back to the theme here, which is power. I would say that what that tells me is mindfulness isn't yoga, but it's very closely related, right? But what we're doing in meditation is basically adding more power to whatever's already happening in the mind and in the body. You know, it's like supercharging whatever is already happening there. And so we have to be very cautious and thoughtful and reflective about that. Like, what is it in our mind already? And how is our practice going to expand that? And I have to say, like, I've kind of seen that in myself. I've seen it in my students as well. Our natural tendencies tend to be exaggerated through the practice. So I feel like there needs to be an awareness around social justice, because that's just a kind of catchphrase for caring for others, right? I want to go back. I put this slide in just because since we're talking about yoga philosophy, I always want to bring up this person, Ashtavakra, who many of you probably know. He was the guru of King Janaka, and I know Ramananda tells stories about King Janaka, and I don't know if you tell stories about Ashtavakra though. Gurudev did occasionally. Do you?
Now, Gurudev would tell the story of how Ashtavakra helped King Janaka become enlightened.
Right, when there was a fire. The quick version is basically that King Janaka was a great king, and Ashtavakra didn't want to take him on at first, but then was convinced because of his interest. And then the other monks at the ashram were like, wow, you can't have a king here. He's not a real yogi. And so Ashtavakra basically tested them all. And he had someone run in and yell, fire, fire, the whole kingdom's on fire. And all the quote yogis that were there ran out to check on their little huts and all their meager belongings. And King Janaka, who basically owned the whole kingdom, sat there in meditation undisturbed by the idea of it all burning down in fire. So that's how King Janaka proved that he was a true yogi. But the other story about Ashtavakra is actually that he was, quote, cursed by his father in the womb because his father was reciting the Vedas. He made mistakes in his pronunciation. Ashtavakra corrected him as a fetus. He corrected his father's pronunciation, and his father cursed him in 8 curses, to be cursed in 8 ways, which is why he has 8 bends in his body. Basically, I think what it really comes down to is that Ashtavakra had a physical disability.
Yeah.
And so there's a drawing. This is a drawing on the right that was actually not that old. This drawing is probably from the 1800s of Ashtavakra, who basically showing him as a person with a physical disability. But Ashtavakra became a great yoga master, and there's a book that he probably didn't write that's called Ashtavakra Gita. Oftentimes people would write books for their teacher, rather than signing their own names, they would sign the name of their teacher. And that's the case here. And I have a quote from the Gita, the Ashtavakra Gita. I just think it's really beautiful. And I guess the reason I'm sharing this is because I think it's important for us to see that we had a figure within the yoga tradition who is a person with a disability. If you wish to be free, know you are the self, the witness of all these, the heart of awareness. Set your body aside, sit in your own awareness. You will at once be happy, forever still, forever free. You are everywhere, forever free. If you think you're free, you're free. If you think you're bound, you are bound. Meditate on the self, one without two, exalted awareness. And he's known for being, into the idea of oneness, right? You might want to read that book. It's really good, by the way. So that brings me back to yoga and ableism. And I have another question for you. It's really 2 parts, and maybe I'll answer the first part for you. The first part is, what is ableism? And the second part is, how does it show up in yoga? But maybe I'll just define for you what I think ableism is. And ableism basically is a form of prejudice, much like racism or ageism or homophobia, transphobia. Ableism is the idea that there's a better way to be in our bodies, that there's a certain ideal body to have, and that if you have a disability or if your body looks different than that ideal, that you're less than or not as good as others, as someone who does not have a disability. It also includes the idea that people with disabilities should be fixed or changed somehow to meet that ideal. So my question for you, and I want to give you a minute to journal about this, is how does ableism show up in yoga? Okay, so any thoughts?
Can we offer some from the gallery?
Or,
Got corrections. Can you hear us? Corrections.
yeah, correction.
Competitions,
Competition.
capitalism, branding, for a few.
Yes, thank you. In competition, I saw Sevika said competition or expectation with oneself or with others. Ramananda says emphasis on doing advanced poses, pictures of advanced yogis highlighted to us all. Grace said assumptions. Sarni said pretzel pose is full expression of the pose. Quote, full expression of the pose. Yeah, thank you. I have some similar ideas. Let's see what I put here. So I'd say, Claudia said defining yoga as asana practice, focusing on, Diana said focusing on perfection. Cover of yoga journals, right, I know. I know. I'm continuing in that theme. No one's supposed to know I'm going to be on the cover. It's not coming out till December, so don't tell anybody. And I'm not doing any fancy poses, I don't think. All right, so
Sorry, I mentioned that. Jivana, I'm sorry I mentioned that.
that's okay. Just don't tell anybody. Mukunda said one-sided limited views of what is yoga from magazines and social media. Yeah. And I start by saying if it's not accessible, it's not yoga, which is one of my catchphrases. I think upon reflection, you might consider what that means, which is to say that to me, accessibility is that universality, right? Something that actually we all have access to. And it's so clear if you look at the yoga teachings that we all share the same spirit, right? We share that same Atman Purusha. So to me, if it's not connected to that, it's not really yoga. So if I see some complicated pose without a way of making that available to other people, I don't feel like we're doing yoga. And like you said, avoiding the hyper-focus on advanced asana as a goal, rejecting healthism. All right, so this is what I have something here from IAYT. And now I am a yoga therapist, as Ramananda mentioned, but it doesn't mean that I don't have criticism of yoga therapy. And I do. And what I wanted to talk about was what I like to call healthism. This idea that health is, that being healthy is better than being unhealthy. That there is somehow like some essential meaning to health, rather than the fact that we're all going to basically become disabled, as Ed Roberts said earlier in that quote, that we're all going to get, well, actually, you're either going to get disabled, get sick, or you're just going to die. It depends on, you know, personally, which way you want to go that route, but it's coming for you. You know what I mean? It's unavoidable. No matter how healthy you are, you're still going to die. And I think yoga is clear about that and teaching us to not identify with the body and mind, to understand that it's real and we need to care for the body and mind as an important vehicle for this journey, but to try to identify with spirit instead. So within yoga therapy, I have the quote from the IAYT of how they define yoga therapy, which is an image on the right. It says, yoga therapy is the professional application of the principles and practices of yoga to promote health and well-being within a therapeutic relationship that includes personalized assessment, goal setting, lifestyle management, and yoga practices for individuals or small groups. That, I mean, on the surface, that seems fine, but I would just say personally that I feel like the idea of promoting health and well-being is actually at odds with the philosophy of yoga. I think that health and well-being are a byproduct of yoga, kind of a side benefit of the practice, rather than the focus. Yoga is essentially a spiritual practice. Like I said before, it's about connecting with the truth, identifying the truth of who we are. It's not that we don't all want to be strong and healthy and not get sick, and that's fine. And yoga therapy can help us with that. But to me, that definition misses the mark because it misses the point that even if you're ill, even if you're disabled, even if you're dying, that you can be healed, you can be whole, right? You can find fullness through that journey. And I've been frustrated with them forever. And I actually, to be honest, I went to a yoga therapy IAYT conference way like early on. I think it was like 2014 or something. And I was so frustrated at the lack of holism or holistic perspective that they were bringing to yoga teachings and the way they were focusing on simply trying to get yoga to fit within the Western model of medicine. And I think there's the Western model is, and Western medicine has a lot to offer us, but it's not yoga. And so to make yoga fit in that system means that you're going to keep part of yoga out of it. And that seemed dangerous because it also will keep other people out. For example, people who are disabled, people who are chronically ill, people who don't get better, people who die, you know. And like I always say in my trainings, I always ask, is death a failure? You know, have you failed if you die? So nothing's changed. You've all known me for 25, 30 years now. I'm saying the same things I've been saying for 30 years. Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit broad to a little more broad ideas around power dynamics in yoga and things we can do to address that. So since I've given you some idea already about what I'm trying to talk about, I want to ask you to think about, maybe this question's too broad. I don't know. You tell me. What is the role of power in yoga within the community and in the practice itself? So I guess we've kind of covered the practice a little bit. Maybe we could shift to that community part. Like, what is the role of power within yoga communities? Is that a fair question? Can I ask you? Can I give you a minute to reflect on that? Okay. So, any thoughts? What is the role of power within the yoga community? Just like Deanna said, just like the mindfulness study, power of yoga can feed many different things, self-centered or not. Yes. Sarnia said shared, connected, supporting all, each other, not hierarchical. Yes. To support and protect the full teachings of yoga, to clearly express how these teachings are accessible to all. Thank you, Mukunda. So I have some thoughts. Grace said to gain compassion to see through situations. Wait, it went away. Gain compassion to see through situations of personal truth that may benefit the decisions that affect others. Anjani said it's shared, flowing from primordial consciousness to us, through us, in a spiraling cycle of sacred reciprocity. Well, wow. And is that Eric who said organic food isn't available for or affordable to everyone?
That was Saraswati.
Saraswati, hi.
Hi.
That's a good point. Not just organic food, how about food? People are starving, you know, and then food's being wasted. It's unbelievable. And we go on practicing yoga. All right, so I was thinking about abuse, that we have to consider the fact that there has been abuse in every major yoga lineage. And it seems to me that spiritual communities are seemingly more susceptible to abuse. And so when I talk about power, I mean, you all were being very positive, so thank you, you're so positive. I went more to the negative with this, which is like, power is misused and abused. You know, there's, it seems to me like with power, most people tend to become corrupted in some way by it, that they can't seem to be in that position to be put on a pedestal without falling down. And there's something about spiritual communities where we tend to, I don't know, do that. We tend to idolize people rather than to, it seems like we have trouble finding a way to share these spiritual teachings that are more democratic and peer-led. So I don't know if you've heard of a term, post-lineage yoga. The teacher, Theodore Wildcroft, wrote a book called Post-Lineage Yoga. And basically it's about this idea of peer mentoring between yoga teachers and within communities. And it was a very academic book, but basically what she was getting at is the idea that most yoga lineages have kind of fallen apart. They're not generally very popular. Like people go to yoga studios or they go wherever online. And sometimes within communities, there can be more of a peer support so that yoga teachers can support each other rather than looking to some like guru or teacher that's at the top. So not hierarchy, right? That there's other ways to share and teach yoga that are not hierarchical. The other part of this is we have to look at how communities and individuals with marginalized identities, how are they excluded from power in yoga? What is the impact of racism, ageism, transphobia, fat phobia, etc.? And I think we've seen that shifting slightly. I think we see more representation these days, but still it's like the most, quote, famous teachers or the most successful ones tend to be white, thin, non-disabled, young. And I think it's harder for people who have, who are further from power, right? Who have less resources to make a living and support themselves as a yoga teacher. It's hard for all of us actually to make a living as a yoga teacher. If you're doing that, I don't know how, but I think for people with a marginalized identity, it's even harder. And we can also look at how people are excluded from yoga communities, how they may not feel welcome there because they don't see leaders in the communities that look like them, for example. Which is why I like that BIPOC training that you know, Mukunda and Kamala led, I think is so important because we need leadership. I mean, leadership in these areas, it's not about white saviorism where, you know, we necessarily have to make the change, but we need to basically step aside and allow other leaders to have a role. So Sarni, did you raise your hand? That's good.
For me, there's a question in my mind about the non-hierarchical and the post-lineage idea, and then also cultural appropriation. And those seem sort of like they're rubbing against each other. And so how do you balance that?
Yes, I totally agree with that. I think that's an important point that, well, I just want to clarify one thing about post-lineage yoga, that post-lineage yoga, according to the Theo Wildcraft who created it, and I've asked her myself, it's not anti-lineage. She's not saying that we don't need lineage. What she's saying is it's a natural progression, that people are now teaching and sharing yoga outside of lineages. So she's trying to reflect on something that's happening. She's not making a judgment or criticism of lineage. And I think that changes the way we understand that concept. She's simply reflecting on what's going on in the world, which is that she's in the UK, and she said that her communities tend to be like yoga festivals. And there's a lot of, there used to be, at least before COVID, a lot of yoga festivals in the UK where people just come together and share and practice. And she noticed in those festivals a lot of that kind of peer mentoring, that people would take each other's classes. And she interviewed them and kind of analyzed how they learned and how their own teaching changed in regard to their peers, how much they were influencing each other. So I guess that's just an important point to make, that that is not against lineage. And so I think these things can exist at the same time. We can have lineages. I mean, integral yoga is a lineage. And we can have post-lineage existing at the same time. I think your question is about the fact that if you teach outside of a lineage, does that mean that you are participating in cultural appropriation because you're not acknowledging the South Asian roots of the practice or the teacher that you learned from? But the fact is that most yoga teachers these days have not learned through a lineage, and they have not actually learned directly from someone from South Asia. Most of them have learned from 200-hour teacher trainings that are generally run by white teachers, at least in the US. Do you know what I'm saying? So I actually think the question for me is not so much a philosophical question, but like, how is it appearing in reality? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Like, let's be honest about what's actually going on here. But I don't know if that was your question, if I answered it.
No, it's good. It's just Gurudev has always said, the real guru is within, and that I'm just somebody, acting out my part in the play or on the stage or whatever. He really encouraged you to listen to yourself and question. And I never felt like he was setting himself up as, above everybody else. He was trying to be humble. And then now there's the idea that we need to recognize the lineage and the importance of not appropriating these teachings as something that is our own, that we invented, or that we're making ourselves out to be a lot more important because we're not acknowledging the place where it comes from. And it just, I don't know, it's a balancing act.
It is, yeah, I totally agree. It is a balancing act. I think if you come from a lineage where there's been abuse, especially, then how do you acknowledge the teacher and also not want to talk, promote them anymore? But I think we just have to do that. We just have to say, this is the way, this was my teacher. It just needs to be shared. Like, this was my teacher, and I learned from this lineage. I think we just need to be admitting to that. Acknowledging our sources is another way to think of it. It's like, if you're going to teach yoga, and if if you're going to go write an article for a magazine, you need to acknowledge your sources. It's just not ethical to not do that.
Right.
So where did you get that information is the question. And can you just acknowledge that source, regardless of whether they're abusive or not? And I think that's what you're asking, because I think some people, when there's abuse, say that we should stop saying that person's name. We should stop having their image. You know what I mean? We should basically delete them. And I think there needs to be a way of reconciling those two things. We don't want to just make someone disappear, even if they're abusive. But we need to be able to say, that was my teacher and they abused. And both things, I think. It's a hard question. I think you really hit the nail on the head, Sarni. So thanks a lot.
We can move on, but it's just something that I've been struggling with in my own mind. So
Yeah.
Even if I could say one thing, to me, Gurudev emphasized a lot that the real guru are the teachings. And I think the real benefit of a tradition is you feel, or a lineage is you feel like you have teachings that communicate or articulate the original purpose of yoga rather than somebody's new idea of what yoga looks like. So you have something that feels like the way that you're being taught to practice and to work with yoga is in harmony with its original purpose. And the emphasis is on the teaching rather than the star guru or the star yogi who is impressive in what they can do. Like, you know, when there were less and less of these Eastern masters, what rose into popularity were the star yogis, right?
Yeah.
The John Friend and the, et cetera.
Who are almost all abusive also.
Yeah,
So,
the other names that, and there was this sort of adulation of these beautiful people that were so articulate and admired, and that became a whole nother trip, you know, these star yogis who were at all the conferences. And what got lost in that is the focus on the teachings, where you've been talking about, where there's equity, where there's understood to be equally available and highlighting the spiritual essence of everyone rather than someone's capacity.
yeah.
I have a question, Jivana,
Sure.
on this subject. When I shared the comment of Satguru, I think of that as the inner wisdom within, and I feel like the lineage-based yoga traditions guide us towards that inner wisdom, that self within. And so that was, but I'm actually, my question is Satguru translate into the wisdom within, or is that referring to the actual sitting guru in a lineage?
I think there's another word, it's not coming to me, but it's like the guru principle is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not just Satguru. There's another Sanskrit word. I think that's what you're meaning. That there's the guru principle is that idea, but I would say that exists not just within lineages, but within the yoga teachings too. So even if someone's not practicing in a lineage, they still have access to that, you know. But I think you're all saying the same thing, that yoga, if you look at the heart of yoga, it's about the fact that we have this within us. It's not an external authority. And so there's a tension to me within the way that yoga has been taught traditionally with a guru, and also in the contemporary world, like Ramananda said, where there's still celebrities, that we tend to place the authority outside of us rather than within. And I think that's what I was going to get to. I mean, in a way, that's what I'm trying to say here. Like on number 3 on this slide, like how does hierarchy and power show up in yoga classes? It's like on a practical level, what can you do about your teaching methodology to address that issue that I think it's human nature to want to look to an external authority to tell us what to do and how to do it. And I feel like that's fine when you're starting yoga and you need someone to tell you, okay, this is how this thing works, like this technique. And then this is how this technique works. But the fact is, once you have the basics, I think that you can quickly go deep in the practice. It doesn't have to be externally focused anymore. And a good teacher is just continuing to draw the students further and further into themselves. Not just a good teacher, I would say an ethical teacher is actually giving the students not just power and authority over themselves, but not putting themselves above the student at any time.
could you use some language that would for example, of that, the way you would phrase things, to make the student feel like there was equity there, please?
Well, I mean, I'm talking about two things at this simultaneously. One is I'm talking about is the actual methodology used in class, which I could talk about a little bit. The other is actually about your sense of self as a teacher. And the fact of the matter is that it's just, again, human nature, like I said, to look to an external authority is also human nature to want to be idolized and to want to be loved. And I think it's very easy for us to get into a situation where we allow ourselves to get caught up in the student's perspective of us as somehow better than them. You know, students tend, I mean, I'm sure you've all had that experience. So the student has had like an amazing class and they're like, wow, you're so incredible. You know, and they see you as the source rather than themselves. And you have a choice in that moment to decide, you know, decide if that's true or not. You know what I mean? And I think you have to continually put that back on them. Even if you don't say it out loud, you have to say it inside your mind, because otherwise you're getting trapped, you're getting stuck. Like and that's an integral yoga teaching, I think, that has been clear all along, you know, this idea of like not taking responsibility. But your question is, within the methodology, I would say, could be to tell students, like we do in the beginning of integral yoga classes, to make sure that they're really focusing inward and doing what feels best for them. But I would say also to continually remind them of that during the class, to not necessarily highlight students who are physically more advanced than others, to actually give equal praise to all students who are there just for participating, for actually acknowledging people when they make a choice to do something different than what you're saying, to actually let go of this idea of hierarchy yourself, and that people need to follow what you're saying. And actually, when someone does something different, like they do it a different way, say, wow, that was a really interesting choice you're making to take care of your body and your mind, and to go into yourself and be sensitive to what's happening with you. Another way this shows up for me is within like accessible yoga. I would say there's a tendency when someone physically can't do something that we imagine as like the full expression of a pose, which you shared earlier, Sarni. We tend to simplify. And we almost, I think and I don't know if this is always the case, but often there's a judgment associated with that, oh, you can't do this, so I'm going to give you something less to do. And I think we have to be really thoughtful about our own thought process as a teacher about how much we value different variations of a practice, and whether we really understand that the physical expression, how something looks externally, has no reflection of what is going on inside. Literally no relationship between what someone looks like when they're doing a practice and what their internal experience is. And I would say, what I often teach people with an accessible yoga, I ask teachers to consider, if someone physically can't do an advanced asana, I actually imagine or ask the student to actually go to what I consider a more powerful version of the practice, and that is to work at a more subtle kosha level. Do you know what I'm saying? So like, if you can't physically do some pose, could you imagine it in your mind or do something similar, and then work with your breath and how it would move in that position? And I think those levels of working on the more subtle koshas is actually more powerful, is actually more advanced yoga. I don't know if that helped, Sarni, if that answered your question. You have such good questions, Sarni. Well, you all do. You all have good questions.
Not always great answers, though. That's why we need you. Thank you.
I don't know. All right, so I have some more thoughts here, and I know what time is it? 7? Oh my goodness. Well, the last point on this slide was that, can you advocate for community care by addressing the limitations of self-care? And I just want to say that I also think we need to look at when we're promoting yoga as self-care and as wellness, are we actually avoiding doing hard work of caring for people in ways they need, like through giving them access to mental health or food or shelter, or, you know what I mean? It seems like the idea of self-care has become distorted in that self-care is not replacement for healthcare, for community care, for getting your needs met. And I think it's not right to give someone the burden of caring for themselves when there isn't a support system there for them. And that's not only in the level of individual community, but on a political level, like nationwide. For example, in the US, the fact that we fail people all the time, we don't support people to have time off when they're sick or when they have children or whatever. And then we tell them, you know, go do mindfulness. It feels like we're actually using these practices to make up for a lack of support. And I just feel like we need to be sensitive to that. If that I don't know if that made sense. Okay. I have another question for you. And actually, Sarni, you kind of made me answer this already. So maybe I'll put it back on you all to answer this question. Can you spend a minute reflecting on this? Am I teaching and practicing in a way that fosters independence? And so this topic is agency and consent, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And I'll read the quote in a second, but how about spending a minute reflecting on, am I teaching and practicing in a way that fosters independence? And that's not a yes or no question. It's more like how, like, what are you doing? Okay, so how are you doing that? That's my question for you. How are you teaching and practicing in a way that fosters independence? Giving choices rather than one way, encouraging exploring a pose. See how this feels. What about trying this? Have you found the sweet spot? That's good, Sarni. Civica says, asking students, how does this feel in your body? Can you feel? I mean, to me, this is literally like the most important question that a yoga teacher can be asking, is asking the student to become self-conscious, self-aware, not self-conscious. Mukunda says, helping students to not be reliant on coming to a class to quote, practice yoga the other 23 hours. Yes. Deanna says, helping them to do their own personal practice. They can do it. Exactly. So I feel like that's what the Institute has been beautiful at, and why I stayed involved for so many years, is that I feel like the Institute isn't functioning like a normal yoga business where there's a tendency to want to get people to come back and to become more reliant. And so the quote I quoted myself, did that, why not? The truth of yoga often isn't shared or taught because it's about giving people agency over their body and over their lives. It's about empowering people to be truly independent, and that kind of independence may not be good for business, which is sadly true, which is that, we tend to, within, again, maybe not the Institute, but in a lot of yoga communities, there's this emphasis on codependence rather than independence, that we tend to make students need us more. They need to do the next level training. They need to come back to class all the time. Like you're all saying in the comments, we don't encourage them to practice on their own. We don't encourage them to elevate themselves above us. I mean, to me, the sign of a good teacher is that they actually lift their students above them so that their students are even more advanced than they are. And you just don't see that. I don't think you see that much within the yoga world. I think there's this tendency for dependence. And I have some other ideas I want to share with you. So agency, first I want to identify that the word agency is a sense of power over your own body or over your life, the sense of authority. In asana, it means we shift power from the teacher to the student so that, I mean, this is the thing. I would say that in a yoga class, the student and the teacher need to have equal power and authority. And that's not how we're trained. That's not how we're enculturated. We're taught to believe that the teacher has more and the student has less. And that somehow within this transaction, within this experience of a class, this teacher is giving something to the student. And I think that whole belief is incorrect, basically. I think it's a misunderstanding about the way yoga works. I think what's happening is that the teacher is literally just like sharing what they know about themselves, almost like repeating what they've learned, which I have to say, as a teacher, is really helpful for me, right? I've learned a lot by repeating what I learned over and over and over again. You know, that might be by teaching the same integral yoga beginning level class over and over, that you learn something. But that's the responsibility of the teacher, right? To be able to be clear about what they know and what is the scope of their practice. What are they trained to do and speak on? They can also do their best to create as safe as possible a container for their students so that the students are protected, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But the student has an equally important job. The student has a responsibility to not only to themselves, but to the community. They have a responsibility to come in as a person who has decision-making power over themselves. That means they can say no or yes to anything they want. They do not give up their authority when they walk into the class. Students have rights. You know what I'm saying? Like, they actually have power. And I think we don't often reflect on what that is. Like, what is that power? And actually, the more we can build that up in the students, the more successful they'll be, because that's essentially what yoga is for. Yoga is for helping people find that inner source of power within themselves. And we can do it. We can actually teach yoga in alignment with the essential yoga teachings. You know what I'm saying? If you teach yoga in a hierarchy, I can't say that word, in a hierarchical way, where you're above the student, you're not actually teaching in alignment with yoga, in my opinion. Because yoga is very clear in saying that we're all equal, right? We're all equal in spirit. I guess I made that point clearly. So this is especially important for people who have had trauma, who have been marginalized, or have a lack of resources in some way. It is then especially important that the teacher is conscious about the way they hold power, the way they use power, and how the student responds. If you are teaching a class for an incarcerated, like in a prison, an incarcerated population, you need to be extra sensitive. Well, we call it trauma informed, but really what you're becoming sensitive to is the fact that these people have lost their power. They don't have authority over their bodies and over their lives because they're in a prison. Similarly, if someone has had trauma, they've lost a sense of authority over themselves. They become triggered, maybe they feel like they're still being victimized by whatever happened. And so the idea of trauma-informed teaching is that we learn how to give the power and give the authority back to the student. Sometimes we overly simplify trauma-informed teaching and we talk about word choice. Like we say, oh, don't say this or don't say that, right? Some of those trauma-informed trainings do that. They just give you like rules to follow. But honestly, what's most important is, and not just for trauma-informed teaching, but I would say for accessible yoga as well, is that your focus is on creating a equal power relationship with your student. That is probably the most important thing you can do to make your classes accessible and trauma-informed. And so consent comes in there. And consent is something that we talk about, again, by like check boxes. Like, how do I get consent from someone to touch them? How do I get consent from someone to do this or that? The question of consent, again, is about power. And have you taken away the power of the student, or have you given them power and agency when you go to adjust them or when you give them an instruction? The language that you use, literally the way you say the words, can speak to that question. Am I giving you authority while I give you this instruction, or am I taking it away? Does that make sense? And I want to talk more about that. So I think this might be my last question for you, I hope, because we only have a few more minutes. What are some ways you can create a welcoming culture in your classes? So maybe I won't even give you a minute because I don't want to run out of time. Just tell me any thoughts, like what can you do to create welcoming environment, to share power right away? Do you have any ideas?
What comes to my mind is getting to know the names of your students and greeting them, recognizing them and acknowledging them.
So I have a long list and short amount of time. I'm not going to get to everything, but I'll just say creating a brave space versus safe space. So safe space is something that you can't always provide. You don't know whether someone feels safe or not, but brave means you're willing to be open to challenges. You're willing to meet people where they are, that you are strong enough as the holder of the space, as the teacher, to be willing to be challenged by your students. Sharing your pronouns, I discussed that earlier. Respecting native land, when you're teaching online, saying where you live and the native land that it is, that how it's been stolen from native people, I think is really important in terms of making a welcoming culture and understanding the ways that we are all constantly navigating power in our lives. And then I said, awareness of person first, identity first language. This is another example of within the disability community, there's a disagreement about how people want to be identified. Some people say, I'm a person with autism. Other people say, I'm autistic. So person first means person with blank. Identity first means autism. Like I have autism, I'm disabled. And especially younger people tend to move towards identity first language. So the point of that is to say, give people choice. They can decide how they want to be identified. And then I talked about trauma-informed language already. This just goes into more detail about it. I think that's the same idea I was sharing about giving students authority over themselves, over their practice, to stop or to experience something else. So if you say to somebody, like I really struggle with this. I think, to be honest, I would challenge you all with yoga nidra, the way that we teach it in integral yoga. I think we have to be more careful to give people space to have their own experience. I think there's one thing to suggest, which is kind of, to me, kind of hypnosis. And it's another thing to just guide and to give people their own option to experience something different than what we think they will. And that might be unpleasant. That might be, so it might be, for example, if I say, I'm going to teach you alternate nostril breathing, it is very calming. And then a student, which is very common, says afterwards, that was really frustrating and anxiety producing for me. That means that their lived experience is somehow not aligned with the words that you're saying. You're saying this is calming, and their experience is, no, this is not calming. What you've done is you've actually tried to assert power over them by telling them what they're going to feel. You could find a way to say, like, this may be calming, or it may not. This may not be calming right away. If you get comfortable with this, if you can find a way to do this, it may eventually be calming for you. Do you know what I'm saying? So we don't need to tell people what to feel. Okay, I'm going to try to wrap it up. I have spiritual bypassing, but I'm going to just bypass that. I'm going to stop sharing. I will just summarize spiritual bypassing by saying, the last point I made about avoiding bad feelings or negative feelings is spiritual bypassing. When we want to go to the positive all the time, right? We always go to the positive. It's not necessarily Pratipaksha Bhavana, so I don't want to hear that. It is sometimes an avoidance of pain because we're uncomfortable or because we don't want to be in the presence of someone else suffering or being in pain. So I would just say, as a teacher, I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that other people have discomfort and are maybe suffering or unhappy in some way. Wow, I'm like blurry. Can you see me? We don't always have to fix it. We don't always have to make it better. We can just be present with what is. All right, so I had a little more, but I'm just going to stop there because I think we're out of time.
I want to ask a question.
Yes.
Sometimes when I see a student stop and rest instead of practicing a pose, or I see them modify the pose on their own, I have thought, well, maybe it's good if I acknowledge that and give them positive reinforcement for doing that as a way of highlighting the person who's taking charge of their own practice rather than doing what I'm telling them. But sometimes I think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be calling them out like that. They may not appreciate that.
Right.
Any thoughts about?
I think you're right. I think both are true. I think just trust your instincts, like with everything else you're doing when you're teaching. But if it feels right to acknowledge, you could say it. And one thing you can do with this kind of thing is make a general statement rather than an individual statement, and be like, it's great when you adapt to what feels right for your body right now. And I appreciate when you're doing that. Or something like, one of the things I used to say all the time is, listen to me, but don't listen to me. It's like giving people, and not just saying in the first opening like we do, right? But actually repeating it when you're doing the practice. Be like, try this, see how this feels, or try something else. Show me what you feel like today. Giving time for free movement and seeing what people come up with. I mean, the best thing we can do is increase people's self-awareness, their ability to sense what's happening within them. That's advanced yoga to me. Advanced yoga is someone who's more sensitive to their inner life. Yeah.
Thank you.
May I ask a question? How do we skillfully inquire as to someone's chosen pronouns?
Yeah, I mean, online it's easier than in person, I would say. But what I suggested is simply sharing your own.
I'm sorry. And when the feedback is, wow, I've never been asked that before, and they're offended by even the question, even though you've proffered that information, then what?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to ask everyone. Well, this is what I do. I share mine, and I say, if you feel like it, you can share yours on your Zoom name. If people want to say why, then I can talk about why. In person, it could be the same thing, where you could say, these are my pronouns. As you're meeting somebody, you could ask, but and again, I think just use your common sense. I know you'll figure it out. I know you. Nehan, you're so friendly. Who could get mad at you about anything?
Actually, today I'll share, I had a class, and instead of asking people their name, I said, how would you like to be called? And just to try it on a little bit, like, it's not directly asking people what pronoun they prefer.
Yeah.
But then they can respond with their name, or they can respond with their name and they, them, or he, she, or so it gives people that option if they aren't aware of sharing, never been asked that question, and they're very much, their appeared gender, so to speak, it won't faze them. But if they're clear about their gender identity, that may not be as obvious, they can say their name and then their identity.
Right. You could even have it on a sign-in sheet. You could have pronouns next to name, and then you could check when you're starting class. And that's another way, try to make it just something normal that you do all the time, I think is best. Normalizing it. And if you personally struggle with using they, them pronouns for individual person, I'd suggest practicing. And a friend of mine who uses they them pronouns recommended that you practice by actually using it for like a pet, something around you all the time. Like if you have a pet, you could start using they them for the pet, or for like a stuffed animal, like start talking about it just to get practice to doing it. Because a lot of people, I find a lot of people I know really struggle with that, with how to use they them in their sentences. It's quite easy once you get used to it. And people appreciate it. I think people really, I know people get really upset when they're misgendered, honestly. Is that the big takeaway tonight? It's pronoun. That's good.
Just one of many.
Okay. That's okay. It's hard. This is funny, like teaching in front of Ramananda and all of you, it's like, you know, it's like going home and then having to like do some kind of like recital in front of your parents, you know, or like, I don't know, like some it's like if going like trying to get my family to listen to me talk about yoga. I don't know. Anyway, thank
We
you.
love you like family, Jivana.
Yes, thanks. Me too. Thanks for having me. Any
Yeah,
other
Jivana,
thoughts? I don't want to keep you, but I'm happy to answer your questions. Yes.
I was just going to say, Jivana, you've really looked deeply into all of this, much more than most of us. Many people may have taken your training, so they've been exposed to some of this. But I think it's important for us to grow in our awareness, and this is a big part of educating ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it was useful. I think to me, the takeaway is something I've said over and over. It's about power, just to really challenge yourself, you know, to look at how you're approaching your students in terms of power. I think it's very important. And yourself, you know. Because I think for some of us, you know, like for me as a gay man, I think I tend to make myself smaller often, and I notice that, you know, like when I'm out with, like, if I'm around a lot of straight people. But I think that's how it works. Like all of us have different identities and different ways of navigating these issues. So I just think it's something that's worth exploring. Anyway, I hope it was useful. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all of your attention and participation.
Why don't you lead us in some kind of closing, Jivana, as you like.
Okay. Maybe we could just take a moment to settle in. I give people an option to have the eyes open or closed. Take a few breaths. See if you can let yourself feel more grounded on the exhale. Length and longer on the inhale. And we can end with Om Shanti 3 times together. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you.